After the defeat of Kazuya by Heihachi at the King of Iron Fist Tournament 2, the world was rid of the devil. However, an even greater threat was brewing for over the course of 20 years. In the ruins of Mexico, Heihachi and his Mishima Zaibatsu uncover and awaken an ancient evil, Ogre, the god of fighting. Now unleashed into the world, Ogre begins to track down and kill all of the previous fighters from the last Iron Fist tournament. The only hope remaining to defeat this threat is the spark of the next generation of fighters, the successor of the Mishima and Kazuma bloodline, Jin Kazama. This is the legend of the King of Iron Fist Tournament 3. Tune in or tune out. You're tuning in to the J Blast Network. Oh yeah. Welcome to the next level. It would be hard to top something as grand as Tekken 2. Hell, even back then, it was hard for Namco to even compete with Virtua Fighter, their 3D fighting competitor. Fighting games were changing as more and more 3D fighters started arriving on the scene, and some of the 2D fighters beginning to reach their peak in the late 90s. So where was Tekken to go besides just dropping the same characters with a few new additions? What would make the next Tekken stand out from its fighting contemporaries? That answer was its story. Although many fighting games at the time had a story, Tekken was one of the only ones to really show off his story and have it change up the game. Having the protagonist and villain switch roles between the first and second game, and even changing up some of the fighters that we were rooting for. You didn't really have the story affect the roster as much as Tekken did, and while it may seem like a bad thing to a lot of old fans who had their favorites, it actually had the reverse effect of creating more intrigue into the series. And so it made sense that after 2 games of this ongoing rivalry between father and son, there needed to be a shakeup, a new face or new faces that would lead the next game. And so it was decided that Tekken 3 would go the approach of the new generation, a risky move considering the fan base love for the current roster. However, unlike its 2D rival Street Fighter, which initially failed when incorporating the new generation of fighters in Street Fighter 3, Tekken would not only succeed, but it would set the standard for the roster for the games all the way up until now. Series favorites like Jin Kazama, Ling Xiaoyu, Harang, Eddie Gordo, and many others will be introduced here, almost creating a soft reboot for this dark fighting game franchise. Though the question remains, why was Tekken 3 so successful, and how did it manage to carry a whole genre on its back for one system? That's where I come in. Hi, my name is Jay, and you're tuning into the J Blast Network as we take a blast to the past to kick some ass in the King of Iron Fist Tournament 3, Tekken 3. Tekken 3, much like its predecessors, is a 3D fighter that plays on a 2D plane. Only this time, in Tekken 3, the fighter does enter the third dimension with the sidestep. This move allows you to shift into the foreground or background and serves as another way to evade attacks or use attacks with the sidestep, catching your opponent off guard. For a mechanic, this seems essential to 3D fighters. It really wasn't implemented until now. Not even Tekken's competitor, Virtua Fighter, would have this move until its third game in Fighters Megamix. Jumps were also turned down from the previous games, no longer allowing for moon jumps, and animations and gameplay had become more fluid than before. And the crazy thing is, compared to the other 3D fighters on the PlayStation, Tekken was already a pretty fluid game, so this just made the experience even more smooth. It may not seem like much change, but smoothing out the animations and adding the sidestep made the game feel more fast-paced and juggle-friendly. It feels like Tekken truly became the fighter it was meant to be with this iteration, and completing this was the characters. Tekken 3's greatest change will be the new generation roster that was introduced into this game. Despite the absence of the original poster boy of the series, Kazuya, the new roster was able to stand out on its own so much they have become staples to every Tekken roster since. Let's start with Jin Kazama, the greatest fighting game protagonist in fighting game history. The son of Jun and Kazuya on a quest for revenge against Ogre for the death of Jun, with a burning passion in his blood much like the flames on his pants. Jin plays like a mix of Kazuya and Jun, taking more moves from his father. All of Kazuya's staples are here, such as Hell Sweeps and Electric God Fist, along with some moves from Jun. Having some of the best moves from both of those legacy characters made him a force to be reckoned with in this game, just as he should be. Jin is just too raw.
You win.
Ling Xiaoyu, the young Chinese girl who uses a fighting style similar to Wang Jinrei, her grandfather. She joins the tournament to be able to build her dream music park. Matching her cheery personality, her fighting revolves around jumps, kicks, and hopping around and over the opponent for some devastating kicking action. Hao Rang, the Taekwondo fighter and rival to Jin, joins the fight after Ogre defeated his master Beck, who he takes some of his moves from. Hao Rang's kicks are his greatest asset, skyrocketing opponents in the air and juggling them into oblivion. He constantly switches stances depending on the move used and can even switch them from a sidestep. This guy will make your opponent Taekwondo dead. Eddie Gordo, the Capoeira champion, joins the tournament in an effort to find out who killed his parents when he was a child. When Eddie was just a boy, he took the blame for his dad's murder so the assassins that killed him would not come for him. In jail, Eddie met a capoeira master and learned the style from him and is now utilizing his style to take down those that wronged him in the past. Eddie is one of the most busted characters in the game, with his breakdancing being hard to defend against, but that's exactly why I like using him. These legs are E for everyone. Brian is a former corrupt police officer shot down on duty and turned into a cyborg by Dr. Abel, an evil scientist working for the Mishima Zaibatsu who wants to take over the world with his cyborgs. Brian enters the tournament to take down Yoshimitsu, who has ties to Dr. Bakanovich, Dr. Abel's rival. Brian is an aggressive kickboxing style fighter and hits like a tank, showing his opponents no mercy. His heart cold as the steel his body's made out of. The rest of the newcomers are direct descendants of the previous fighters and have very similar movesets to their elders. Julia Chang is the daughter of Michelle Chang and enters the tournament after her mother gets kidnapped by the Zaibatsu along with her mother's pendant. Forrest Law is the son of Martial Law, who is literally his father. I mean, they don't even distinguish the name on the character select. He joins after being roped in by Paul Phoenix to compete in the tournament. And King, or King 2, was an orphan of the original King's orphanage, and King 1 was killed by Ogre. Learning of the death of his predecessor, King 2 enters the tournament after being trained by Armor King to avenge the original King and get money for the orphanage. Jack also makes a return as a different model, this time as Gun Jack, which was made by the little girl Jane that Jack was protecting in Tekken 2. And Kuma returns, this time being the son of the original Kuma who died of old age. As you can see, the running theme of the new generation taking over the old generation is held throughout the whole game, but I think what made these characters more initially impressive compared to something like Street Fighter 3 was that the majority of the newcomers were just younger versions of previous characters, which means their movesets were the same or very similar to the old characters, which pisses less people off who would cry about if their character did not get in the next game. So you can kind of call it a fail-safe. But I think it was a genius idea, especially since these characters have some new moves and new ways to play, and new stories, setting them apart from their elder counterparts. The only characters that return and are the same but aged a bit are Heihachi, Paul, Lei Wulong, Nina, and Anna, with Heihachi being really old this time. This pushes the new generation theme even further, as only a few of the old cast remain alive thanks to the actions of Ogre, making him an instant threat to the successors. Ogre even controls some of the veterans like Nina, who was awakened from cryosleep by him to assassinate Jin. As cool as some of this story stuff is, none of it was actually in the game itself, besides the endings. It's just outside lore that was pieced together by fans from manuals and later games, which sucks, but understandable because of the limited space in the PlayStation hardware. and it's not like there wasn't something to make up for it. Even having an extra random character named Mokujin, who was literally a random select each round. This wooden puppet copies the opponent's skills in an effort to help the martial artist fight against the god of fighting, Ogre. For a wooden puppet, he was rock solid, and made for players who themselves the random select button. It's also pretty interesting having a character like this back then because it used up a lot of memory to pull another character's moveset after each round. And while some fighting games will do this today, Mokujin was one of the first characters to implement this idea, adding to Tekken 3's revolutionary status. Tekken 2 set the darker atmosphere that people know Tekken for today. With its stages and music, the game mostly represented the darker yet somber side of the characters and stages. However, Tekken 3, in contrast, with its techno rock and funk tracks, represent a spark brought on by the new generation. Just compare Kazuya's stage and music to Jin's. Kazuya surrounds himself in this dark, empty tower, reflecting on his inner demon, and his theme matched this. While Jin's stage is in a dojo with him training and improving to take on Ogre, becoming that new spark that is needed to defeat Ogre once and for all. Zayu stage is an amusement park, glittering in the night sky, carried by the hard rock. King sends his opponents in his ring in the sky amidst the cold mountains with a track that builds up with a smooth guitar. Yoshimitsu theme cuts through your ears with a powerful beat, emanating the surrounding forest. And Heihachi's theme shocks hard like his electric fist that he's about to sing to the game over screen with, standing as the last defense of the temple, showing that this old dog can still whoop your ass. Those were some of my highlights, but Tekken 3, despite not having every character have a stage, still has a variety of stages that make up its atmosphere. Stages in fighting games matter, and Tekken 3 does not disappoint. Fighting games in the 90s usually always had some special mode to it, and Tekken 3 was no different. The devs wanted to add as much content as possible so people would feel like they owned the complete product, which is commendable, especially since Tekken was one of those cheaper fighters on the market back. The two modes consist of Tekken Force and Tekken Ball. Tekken Force is a beat 'em up mode where you take on the Tekken Force, all of it, including Heihachi at the end. Apparently, this mode was born from the devs wanting the characters to pick up chicken, akin to something like Streets of Rage. Tekken Force definitely feels like a beat 'em up back then, except with the full moveset of the Tekken roster, and it's rad as hell. I spent so many hours just playing this back in the day, trying to get a higher score with different characters. At the end of the mode, you face Heihachi, essentially taking down the whole Tekken Force, with one extra boss at the end if you meet certain conditions. We'll get back to that later, but for now, let's talk about Tekken Ball, the fighting volleyball type game. You use a ball to hit the opponent until they die, so essentially like a regular match, except you can only touch each other with the ball. It gets really heated as you both juggle the ball and try to see who can outlast each other the longest. That's where the fun comes in. And I want you to notice something as we're playing Tekken Ball. Look what we're doing. We're juggling. We're juggling the ball, which in a way kind of teaches you how to juggle, or at least let you practice juggling. I didn't think about this until after I played it and realized, hey, wait a minute, I'm learning how to juggle an opponent a little bit. It's still a ball, but you get what I mean. I guess what I'm trying to say is that Tekken has made different ways for players to learn the game without just putting a tutorial in your face and reading a bunch of text. Now, I know some things can only be explained like that, but I really like the way that Tekken does it, because it's like you're learning subconsciously. And it's great content for single player and multiplayer, so you can do other things besides just the fighting or just playing arcade mode or survival, which a lot of fighting games, even today and even back then, lacked. These modes even come with unlockables with some of the goofiest characters in the game, Gon and Dr. Boskanovich. Dr. B is unlocked by beating Tekken Force 4 times and gathering all the keys and beating his secret boss fight. This character is weird at first, and you may think he looks like a Yoshimitsu clone by his stance, but then the dude just starts juggling himself, doing all kinds of wacky crap. Bro is an absolute cornball. Then there's Gon, who you get from beating him in Tekken Ball. He's not even a Tekken character, making him one of the first guest characters in a fighting game. He's from a manga called Gon, created by Masahiro Tanaka, with the manga just being the adventures of Gon getting into all sorts of adventures. I guess one of those adventures led him to the Tekken universe, where he is absolute garbage. He may look cool, but this dude is too small and has such a small range to hit anyone, and is slow on top of that. He's a cool novelty, but that's it. Still, despite its quality, I miss when fighting games would add stupid characters like this just for shits and giggles, even if they weren't viable at all. Fun fact, Gon also appeared in the Tekken Motion Picture, which is the anime that most people know about, which covers the story of Tekken 1 and 2 in an abridged way. He made a cameo appearance as Dr. B's experiments, so does that mean that Gon here is an experiment like the movie? It would make a lot of sense considering we got characters like Alex and Roger running around, but who knows. Now in the modern era of fighting games, these characters can't really exist because of budgeting, and the competitive scene has gotten so much more viable for people that you can't really add characters that suck this hard or just goofy, because then you just wasted money on a character that no one is going to use. But it's nice to go back to a game that had these extra features when they were able to implement these extra features. It was gonna be hard to top the final boss of Tekken 2. Devil was such an intimidating force, from his music and mirror stage to the build up in the series at that point. Just the idea of the previous protagonist corrupted was just a dark twist on fighting games back then. So how would Ogre compare? Well, he does have a pretty rad design that matches his godly status. He also uses some moves from other fighters, specifically the ones that have been claimed to be killed, which just gasses him up as a formidable foe even more. Plus, he has psychic abilities. Compare that to Devil, who was more intimidating for his appearance, but plays similar to Kazuya, except he had a laser beam, and you could see who would be the scarier threat here. It's just too bad that the fight with Ogre is not as good, however, but that mostly comes down to the atmosphere that Devil gave off rather than the boss fight itself. However, all the intimidation goes out the window when beating his first form, and he absorbs Heihachi and becomes true Ogre. Now this form does look grotesque and alien, and is unlike anything that we've seen in Tekken up to this point. But as for the fight, the dude is a complete jobber. He's just too big, and rushing him down will kill him in a few seconds. I thought bosses were supposed to get harder after they transform. What kind of shit is this? This just kills the whole last part of the fight for me. You know, fighting games had intimidating bosses, not just because of the lore, but because they kicked your ass, especially if it was in an SNK game. You had to work for that victory, but compared to the other Tekken bosses up to this point, Ogre is all talent and no answer. After defeating Ogre, as with the previous games, you get an ending, but with the way Tekken works, we have to piece them together to get the full story. Jin defeats true Ogre, avenging his mother, only to be greeted by the Tekken Force shooting him down, with Heihachi putting a final shot in him. But Jin gives in to the devil powers that were shown given to him in the opening. It was the only way he could survive that, but I think the tragedy was that this could have been avoided, because Jin didn't need the devil to defeat Ogre. That also just shows how much stronger he is compared to his father and his grandfather. But yet again, Heihachi is the catalyst to his own problems, wanting to claim the power of Ogre for himself and get rid of the devil at the same time, which in his ending he does, throwing Jin off an airplane before his devil gene could activate. What an old bastard. Eddie traces his father's killers, only to discover the man responsible for the hit was Kazuya Mishima. But he's dead, right? King 2 reigns as champion in wrestling, only to discover his mentor Armor King has cancer. Julia is able to rescue her mother in this hilarious 90s ass dub cutscene.
No, Julia, wait. Julia, hatred is not the answer. Do you remember why I taught you the powers to fight? It was to protect Mother Earth, not to destroy. Now let's go home, back to Arizona, where the land awaits us.
Xiaoyu gets her amusement park, but Heihachi tricks her and makes Heihachi land instead, causing him to get his ass beat on the spot. Hwoarang is reminiscing over the tournament, only to see Jin escaping a Tekken force from his previous encounter. Hwoarang helps Jin out, allowing them to continue their friendly rivalry some other day. And Brian continues his rampage. The rest of the characters' endings are mostly jokes like Kuma getting rejected or Mokujin getting beat by his wife for playing Tekken 3 itself. How meta. But to comment back on the main story, Tekken 3 still keeps the tragedy of Tekken's story, but I think it's much more worse here since Jin could have been saved if Heihachi never betrayed him. Heihachi is, again, the ultimate catalyst for all the events in Tekken, and as we get in future games, we'll only see his deeds get worse and worse. Jin would stay the protagonist for a while, being the only good member of this terrible bloodline, although still suffering from the side effects of Devil. Although this ending was ambiguous, it was interesting back then to see where the story would go, and it would only make players more hyped to see the following releases. You know, you're not really getting the most out of a fighting game if you aren't playing the multiplayer, and normally this is the part of the video where the YouTuber says that he has no friends to play with. Well, here on the J-Blast Network, I actually have friends, unlike you losers. Well, I can't lie, it's really good apart set where you can play retro games online since all my friends are scattered all over the place. But the multiplayer is of course just as, if not more fun than the single player side of the game, with more options opening up as players have more adaptability than the CPU. You even get rewarded in some ways. If you play the multiplayer a lot, you'll see certain characters have extra costumes, which are unlocked by playing as them in versus a certain amount of times. Jin and Xiaoyu get school uniforms, for instance, and you unlock a school stage with them. But in order to get that, you have to play as both of them 50 freaking times. Jesus Christ. It should never be that much. The rest do have smaller amounts to get their costume, but one does stand out, and that's Tiger Jackson, who you get from getting all the endings before his. His is a skin for Eddie Gordo, and is a disco breakdancing machine. And he even has his own ending too, where he gets down with the groove. There's also Panda, who's a unique skin for Kuma, and would later be her own character in future games. She's the pet of Xiaoyu, mirroring how Heihachi has Kuma as his pet. And she's also the one that Kuma got rejected by. Tough luck, my dude. It's awesome that no matter what you're doing in Tekken 3, you're always going to have something to unlock for everything, which is really cool, as it incentivizes you to play more modes. Though I wish we had a cheat code just to get everyone when you just want to play with friends. Because I was trying to play this on Parsec and I ended up having to get a save file that didn't even work, so we just got stuck playing the base characters. It's a darn shame, really. When it comes to the next generation of fighters, at least back in the late 90s, it was a very rough market. Games like Garo Mark of the Wolves and Street Fighter 3 would suffer backlash from fans, even though now they're considered the best in their franchises. But in a time where it was a struggle to push anything new, Tekken stood out from the rest. But it was more than that. The extra modes and content that filled the game was incomparable to many fighters on the market, and it ran well too. It was so good that even some of the best PS1 fighters would be panned by critics just because it was not Tekken 3, which is kind of stupid. I mean, you got games like Battle Arena Toshinden 1 scoring higher than games like Bloody War 2, but that's another topic for another day. With all this, it isn't hard to see why Tekken remains at the top when it comes to fighters on the PlayStation. Tekken 3 would be the last PS1 Tekken game, as by the time the sequel Tekken Tag Tournament was released, the PS2 was on its way to store shelves. So in a way, Tekken ended an old era and brought upon a new one that will be a bright future for 3D fighters and the Tekken series. I know it may seem hard to go back to some of these older fighters, and believe me, after playing a lot of them, it really is. But of all of them, I do think that at least on the PlayStation, Tekken 3 stood up the best, and that's why it is the king of the PlayStation fighting games. Thanks for watching the video. I got more content on the way. Appreciate it if you like and subscribe if you enjoyed the content that you saw here today. We got more videos coming out, more commentaries, more put your quarter ups, things like that. You'll all see it in the future. So, with that all being said, this is the J-Blast Network signing out. And don't forget, you better believe, baby. Yeah.